So shortish section and then a 5-minute break. Well, this is something you know. Children absorb vocabulary and grammar together as they learn language for the first time. They are communicating with, listening to family members and the other people around them. When adults are learning a second language or a third or fourth, they also learn the new language best in situations where they're truly communicating with others, not just parroting things. One difference between learning language as a child, though, and learning one later in life is that adults look for patterns and they try to fit the new information into what they already know about language. Sometimes that's really useful, and sometimes it just mixes them up. So you'll need to offer your students some explicit instruction in grammar, but it should be integrated into the other components of language learning and taught through real-life situations. In this unit, we will give you examples of how you can use communication to teach grammar. But please keep in mind that if it's just as Beth said about students having varying needs for pronouncing English, speaking English absolutely correctly. Some need to be able to do that and some don't. If you're working with a more advanced ESL or basic literacy student, you might want some actual grammar lessons in order to learn to speak correct English. And in that case, the book or books that you're using will guide you through those. So for now, let's proceed with how to teach grammar using communicative approaches. And I hope I don't have to say communicative again because I don't like that word. You have a handout on the communicative approach and grammar and ESL teaching methods, teaching grammar creatively and so forth. But we will give you some ideas about how to do that. Real communication. If you're talking with your student, for example, about something you did last night, you could say, I watched the movie with him, and then turn it into, he watched the movie with me. That's a grammar lesson. If you're talking about your daughter's birthday, and this is a little bit more advanced, you could say, I gave a present to her. And then you could show your student that you can also say that I gave her a present. So you can prepare contextual methods to focus on whatever grammar at whatever level you plan to teach your student, or something might just come up in conversation that the student wants to know how to say. If that happens, go with it. Don't worry if you're missing something else that you might plan for your lesson. You can always fit that in later or the next lesson. Or you might observe something, especially over time, that your student needs to understand. And in that case, you can either stop right there to explain it and illustrate it, or you can use your observation to prepare a future lesson, or you can do both. We model correct grammar. For example, we might teach the a and an by using them with the words we introduce in the vocabulary. An apple, a carrot, a loaf of bread, modeling it. We can use examples drawn from the student's life and use them both in conversation and in writing lessons. For example, instead of using made-up sentences to teach, say, past tense verbs, we can ask students to talk about themselves, what they did this morning, what they did yesterday, and we can talk about what we did yesterday. Tutors indirectly teach grammar by providing many chances for students to talk. Learning grammar takes a lot of trial and error. Your lessons are a safe space where your student feels comfortable trying to say something even when they're not sure whether it's right or not. Because the focus of language is not on learning rules, but on using English and making the student making themselves understood. We need to keep the rules that we do teach simple. So students won't need to know every little detail of a grammar rule. They need a simple rule that they can remember and use. You have a handout, or I already told you about that. Teaching Grammar Creatively, which is a blog post by Stephanie Long from the Reach to Teach website. And it works for basic literacy students as well. And it's a really good overview of this. So let's recap. We all learn grammar as it's modeled for us. Most native speakers communicate with correct grammar long before they get formal instruction in grammar in school, assuming that they're listening to people speak and they learn to talk with people who use correct grammar, of course. The ESL student also learns the correct grammar of English by repeated usage, not by learning specific grammar rules. Oops, I didn't mean to go forward. Well, sorry. I moved my finger for emphasis. We teach beginning grammar as part of conversation and vocabulary lessons.
Okay, so now let's use the example of teaching contractions in a conversation. Some of you have already noted that we speak with contractions, and that's what students will hear most often. We can also use hand gestures as we model the examples to indicate when the student should listen, you remember that, and when to respond with the beckon. And we can use hand gestures to illustrate how words are combined to form a contraction. Using our fingers apart, as you can see in the picture, as well as maybe if you are able to see my screen, which indicates there are two words, and then coming together, also as you see in the slide, for the contraction, which becomes one word. This can become a common signal for contraction in the future. You can also make written visual aids showing contractions if you're teaching them as part of a reading or writing instruction. And again, the slide shows how these written examples would illustrate the two words being combined into one in a V shape, similar to the hand gesture. Another way of working on contractions is with the substitution drills, and hopefully you remember we talked about them earlier on in the ESL vocabulary. And here we can use the same kind of drill for grammar. This is an example of teaching the contraction it's, using a visual cue of showing an object. Now I need a trainee to play along with me and do the student's role that's on the slide. I can't see you all because of how my screen is set up, but Susan, could I ask you to be the student?
Sure.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit so I can see what I'm doing as well. Okay, I could show the book, the object, the word that I'm trying to teach, and then say, give you the clue to listen, book, it's a book, it's a book. And then I would do my beckon.
It's a book.
Good. Listen again. It is a book, it's a book. It is a book.
It is a book.
Good. It's a book.
It's a book.
Good. It is a book. It's a book.
It is a book. It's a book.
Great. What a fast learner. And so we would, practice the same way with other objects or other word formats that we were trying to teach the student. Okay, we model the sentence using the contraction and then model the sentence both without and with the contraction to show the student that the meaning is the same. Again, this can be applied to just about any type of grammar structure. On the next slide, you see some more substitution drills using contractions, and this could be done without having an object or a book to show the student. I think it's obvious enough that we don't really need to go through practice on this. But again, it's a very useful idea. And here are some other examples of using this substitution drill technique. You can see that they can become much more complex as the student makes progress and apply to a variety of situations. I might have gone a little fast, so take a minute to look at that slide before Catherine starts.
Do you remember how we used information grids to expand dialogues in the conversation topic? We, excuse me, used the example of buying stamps at the post office. You can also use information grids to teach different grammar concepts that can be demonstrated or modeled. The tutor models the correct grammar and then gives the student an opportunity to practice. To practice this authentically, the tutor might then have the student talk about their family, saying, "My husband likes pizza. I like rice," and so on. Always try to choose subjects to talk about that could be relevant to that particular student. Grids can also be helpful to teaching grammar by adding a visual dimension to how English works. So you can see here the different versions of this, and you're modeling how the verb changes. Okay, here's some, yep. Was there a question?
No, I thought I had this slide.
Oh, yeah, you do, sorry.
So here are some things that you can make to help your students see some of the relationships between words and word parts. The examples that are shown here include a word puzzle for teaching word order in a sentence, a wheel and bending cards to teach verb endings, and matching puzzles for teaching contractions. In a face-to-face lesson, tossing the beanbag back and forth can add kinesthetic reinforcement to your activity. So that when I throw the beanbag to you, I would say I, and you catch it and say am, then throw it back. And we could continue to go back and forth, alternating turns where I say you and toss the bag, and you say are, and then send it back to me. I say he, and you say is, again, going back and forth. You can also use the hand signals like we did earlier, or I was pretty much doing right here. Or you can use like a clap for taking turns or helping the student to know when you're ready for them to say the next word. Most of the manipulatives that you see here can be held up to the camera on your screen for the student to see. And there are also a lot of good ideas in your tutor information book. Now, this next slide, shows a grammar game that could be used for practicing grammar both inside and out of class. There are lots of games online, and the left side of the slide suggests some titles that you could use to search online for both physical and online game activities to do with students. So the image on the right is the game board that's included in your grammar activities handout. So you can take a closer look at that later. You can adapt this to almost any grammar topic. And again, this sort of game board or worksheet can be displayed on your screen for an online session, or you could send a copy to the student ahead of time so that you can each work with a game board, although you're in different locations. Okay, are there any questions at this point?